order with confidence. I'm Linda Hammond, and you are watching Sparking Discovery, which is about remaining relevant, which we believe is done by exposing ourselves to thought leaders in their fields. This evening, I'll be having a conversation with Oliver Landreth, a colleague of mine, regarding the alignment between branding and culture. So nice to have you on my slot this evening, Oliver, and welcome.
Thank you, Linda. It's nice to be here.
Great.
So
I think let's just get into it. Before we do, though, Oliver is in the Netherlands, if you don't know, and he was just telling me they have got driving rains at the moment. So us here in South Africa are wishing it was us to a large extent. I think the earth's very dry. So
dry rains and horrendous wind.
Okay, maybe we don't want the wind, but we could do with the rain. Right, so let's get into it. You know, I'd like to begin with definitions. They're the bane of my life at the moment. And although the origin of the word brand is related to a branding iron, which really it comes from the branding of cattle, it's evolved tremendously. It is still used to define a unique means of identification that hasn't changed, but it has also come to represent who you are and what you do, not just what you sell. The brand has become the all-encompassing gut feel that people have when they interact with your brand. They either leave there and it's a good feeling, or they leave there and it's a bad feeling, or they leave there and they're completely confused. So this gut feel cannot be established through one lens. There are many lenses through which a brand is viewed. And this multi-dimensional view results in this gut feel that those who interact with your brand have. Would you agree with that definition, Oliver? You know, is the gut feel different for each audience, determined by their experience, which is where brand and culture meet?
So I'll sort of tackle it in components, if I may. For me, brand comes down to one word, really, in terms of definition. It's a promise. I mean, if you hear the word Apple, if you hear the word Microsoft, it tends to, in someone's mind, whether consciously or subconsciously, evoke a certain idea of what that brand or what that company is about, what it's taking to market. And you're absolutely right. It's the experience that the individual has is determined through lots of different lenses. And every touch point goes to make up the brand perception that individual has. So obviously, it's a highly personal thing. It is a function of the experience that an individual has. From the company side, however, your goal is really to ensure or try to strive for as much consistency as possible. And how you get that consistency, I mean, that's probably a separate conversation, but that's where all the elements come together. It's about the promise, it's about culture, it's about communications.
I think, you know, in the past, the practice was really to develop two completely different internal and external brands. And I think that's maybe where the confusion comes in, is because the one brand serves one purpose and the other one serves another purpose, dependent on the stakeholder categories. But this practice doesn't work anymore for a brand overall, because you get this confused sort of like swims like a duck but barks like a dog effect, and then people don't know how to trust it. So, you know, one of the key factors of this change and this swing towards having a consistent feel is really can be attributed to one major thing. And Oliver, you and I have had a discussion about this. What are your thoughts on that? Maybe you can expand on it for us.
Well, I think in my experience, what I'm seeing is that distinction, as you sort of referred to, that distinction between external and internal brand, or internal brand is also known as employer brand, is disappearing. And the main contributor to that disappearance is the predominance of social media. And as a result of social media, it has become very difficult, if not impossible, from an organization's point of view, to separate the messages and the communications in general that go to outside audiences versus internal audiences. And as a result of that, it's become critically important that the promise being made by the corporate brand, which I should stress is not the logo. Logo is simply one visual representation of a brand. But the core promise needs to be consistent across everywhere. And so that's actually resulting in changes to how organizations approach brand and also how they structure, for example, their branding and communications departments.
And I think it's also what they're striving for in culture. You know, you and I have had this conversation on a number of occasions, is they want the person who experiences the brand to experience the culture. But, you know, they can't have a mixed match of cultures. And I really think that's where the tie-in comes, isn't it? It's around the messaging and how we approach that and what kind of culture that delivers. Do you find that?
Yeah, I mean, culture is, really culture is, if we go back a few steps and you look at an organization, they have an overall business strategy. And part of that business strategy is also the brand and the brand promise that they want to take to market. Culture and communications and engagement are all enablers of that business strategy. So it all is interconnected.
You know, and this then is where the rubber hits the road, and this has become quite a hot topic at the moment because engagement surveys reveal that employees want to feel part of the family and not a prospect or a client. You know, so they want to be communicated with as part of a family and not as an outside party. They also feel that often marketing spin is being used on them and they don't appreciate that at all. And I think that builds resentment and it breaks trust. They also don't find that the messaging is relevant to what they need to do to deliver the brand. And I think often that is also something which is confusing for them. So, you know, the question is, how do we overcome this? And something that we've done with many organizations, and we're busy working with one right now. And as you know, we believe that really we have to have an alternative visual language and an alternative lexicon. The message remains the same, but to have an alternative visual language which is more approachable, which is more makes you feel like you're part of the family, and also identifies the fact that this is an internal communication and it's not something that we're going to send to the customer. And it also then tells the customer the employee, how they should feel about a certain operational issue, how they should deal with it to deliver the experience. So I think that having an alternative visual communication has become quite powerful. What are your thoughts about this? And do you think that aligns to culture?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think, I've worked with a lot of different organizations in different parts of the world where we've done campaigns for, as an example, for a company I did some work for in the States, which was a media and communications company of over 100,000 people. We were launching a completely new healthcare program for them, and we needed to create a communications campaign around that was informative and also really got the core messages that the people needed to have across to them. So we did develop a different visual campaign for that, because what it enabled us to do is that every time an individual in the organization and anywhere they were in the world saw that particular visual cue, they knew exactly what it was about. They knew it was targeted for them. They knew it was about healthcare. And depending on their interest or not in healthcare benefits and et cetera, they knew that it was something they wanted to read or delve into. I think when you go beyond that also, it's important to your point that the way that they're communicated with, so the terminology, the words, the actual sentence structure, it really has to come across as something that is respectful of the employee population. They don't want to feel like they're being talked down to. They don't want to feel like they're, just idiots, to put it bluntly. I mean, they want to be treated like adults. And so it's important that you understand what the core concern is of your target audience and that you develop or craft a message in accordance with that.
for me, it's always been I so often see communications going out internally and you read it, and I can imagine that the staff member sits there and thinks, okay, and so what,
Yeah.
and if they left with a so what, it's epic fail. So, I think I'm 100% in agreement with you there that we need to change that visual language. And I think the thing for me that is important is the visual language is not something that needs to be permanent. Like you said, it could be campaign driven, and that could be a theme for a month. So this is what we are trying to achieve. Not a month, sorry, a year. This is what we're trying to achieve in this year. This is our key driver, and let's have a visual cue that aligns to that. So absolutely, I agree with you, but it may change a year later. But I think, tampering with the brand, or what I'd like to call the brand essence, which is who we are, what we stand for, what we're about, what our promise is, and how we deliver that promise. I agree with you 100%. I don't think that is something that should be changed, So I always remember we did a number of projects with a fairly large school, and I think I always relate back to, when the children go on official visits to other schools, they wear their number ones. So they wear a tie and they wear their blazers and their shoes must be polished. But if they're just going to go out for a fun day and all we really need them to have any branding on their body for is because we want to recognize that they're part of this group of people, they wear jeans and a shirt. And also the whole vibe is different. And I think that's really what one tries to establish in a business, because that gets a level of engagement and a level of a feeling of belonging and a sense of a work experience. And I think that experience that every individual has now with your brand, specifically because a lot of it is online, for me, that experience is quite key. It's become the sort of I think the thing, engagement is going and experience is coming in, because, what I experience, if it's good, I'll come back. If I don't enjoy the experience, I won't. So, I don't know, your thoughts around that, the experience and engagement?
Well, I think just backing up one second, I think that there is an element here that is important to remember, and that is, a core component of a brand are the company values. And with that, we could have a whole separate session on culture and values. I'm not going to get into that now, but I think when it comes to communications, I underscore and agree with you regarding a different visual cue for a campaign or whatever it is. For me, what's absolutely critical, though, is that any initiative an organization has towards a stakeholder, whether internal or external, has to be coherent with and in line with the company values. And it has to be credible. And then in addition to that, when we get to internal audiences, communication, as you said, often falls flat. And what needs to happen is there always needs to be a call to action from my perspective. I think so much communication that goes out is simply information for the sake of information. I've seen organizations that do internal comms and they don't actually know that there are 10 different departments all doing internal comms and they're not coordinating. They think volume is the way to get judged by. And actually, it's really about having a clear call to action, having a clear desired outcome. And as long as all of that works, and then the rest of the organization supports the values, then the culture enables the customer experience. And hopefully, you end up with consistent experiences, whether you have different across different individuals.
Yeah, I agree. And when you were speaking about all the divisions having their own communication strategies and their own communication, I think, in our experience, that comes down to measurement. So people are measuring output, not outcome. And I think that's a huge problem, so we sent out 50 memos. We got a newsletter that covers everything. Our division has sent out from the desk of, there's a software package, but they're not having a look at what the outcome is of that. And they're also not having a look at what the cost to benefit ratio is, because all of those cost elements are huge, and they don't really, everybody's got their own communication arm, and they're all sending out messaging across the board. The cost of that is massive, and in fact, I think they're confusing the audience, and they're not getting the outcome that they're looking for, which is an improved culture, adherence to values, etc. So I think when a business looks at internal communication, they really need to start taking it seriously, for want of a better word, and looking at it as a key business driver, as you would finance. Not just looking at it as a nice to have.
There's an example I can quickly cite for you. Some work I did a few years ago, where in the first week I was doing work for them, and there again over 100,000 people in the news and media and financial sector, and 80% of their marketing budget was spent on internal communications. And I spoke to a number of people, and they said, well, we're not getting any traction with our communications. No one's reading it. No one's listening. And I got everybody in a room that I could, who was doing some kind of internal communications. And I had 23 people in the room. They had never sat in the room together before. They had no idea what the person sitting next to them had been doing, or why, or how. And they were, you get the people in the room, and they suddenly understood why they weren't getting any traction, because they were, as you said, being judged, or they felt they were being judged on volume, as opposed to, are they actually achieving what they set out to achieve?
So for me, it's become a case of not disseminating information, but of creating meaning. And I think those are two very, very different things. And I think they're not being measured accordingly. And because they're not being measured, they're not performing to the level that they need to.
I think part of there's another issue tied to that, which is a lot of people just assume that you can't measure that you can't measure outcome, but you can.
It's just, you have to think a bit out of the box. I think the other thing that's interesting for me is when I look at the surveys that people do on communication, because, we'll get called in to come and assist them to get traction with their communication, and they'll say, we've just done a communication survey, and they'll give it to you. But what is not on that survey is, they measure each channel, and they say, do you read this? And I think people feel, well, we must say yes, because if we say no, we'll probably get, But not only that, they also don't ask them what is their most preferred channel, because if you say to them, what is your most preferred channel? That gives you an opportunity to say, well, maybe we can rationalize all of this verbiage that we're pushing out into the organization and just use one channel, which is the most preferred. And so often, it's not multiple channels that are enjoyed by the audience. It's usually only one, so I always find that very entertaining when I look at surveys, etc., on communication.
Yeah, it's I think that there is a tendency these days to assume that you have to do everything digitally. And I did some work with an airline where they were frustrated as hell because, again, not getting traction, not getting outcomes, and they were doing everything via email. What they failed to realize is that the majority of their personnel were cabin and airport staff, and they were not on email. And when they went home, they didn't turn their computers on because they were not working, so they did not actually see the emails. And the best way to reach them, which was a very large percentage of the employee population, was through the rooms at the airport where they changed or got into uniforms or where they met for coffee. So I think that you're absolutely right. And I think a lot of companies and a lot of leaders make assumptions about how people get information, but they don't actually research it. They don't actually ask the question.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons is because they're always trying to find a quick fix silver bullet. And you and I know there's no such thing as a silver bullet when it comes to culture and communication. But we've veered off the topic a bit now. But I mean, I've really enjoyed the conversation. So for everybody who's watching, thank you so much for your time. If there are any related areas you'd like Oliver and I to discuss in a future show, or if you'd like to contact us and discuss it directly with us, we're happy to have a consult with you. But on that note, I'd like to thank you, Oliver, for your participation and wise words. A final word from your side?
Consistency and coherence for me are the critical elements of an effective strategy and execution.
Because now I want to carry on the conversation again. Consistency and coherence. I absolutely agree with you 100. Maybe we should make that next time's conversation. So thank you, everybody, for your time. We really do appreciate it. And if you found this useful, please hit the like button, subscribe, follow, and share if you think someone could benefit from this conversation. And more importantly, talk to us. You can complete our book a consultation form on our contact page on our website. Thank you for your time and good night.
Bye-bye. Thank you.